new polling has Sanders overtaking Biden with black voters. That is critical, of course, when you consider Biden has been counting on a big South Carolina win.
Joining us now, the Hill's national political reporter, Kate Martell, and the Daily Caller's Capitol Hill reporter, Henry Rogers himself. Good to see you guys.
Great to have you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Okay, so this really significantly caught my eye. So Morning Consult came out yesterday. Of course, we know that we all love Morning Consult here. Margin of error, I think, ±1. But on the black voters piece in particular, Henry, Sanders has overtaken Biden by a margin of about 5%. Of course, this is not South Carolina specific,
right,
but you can generally transpose that. And it's kind of a watershed moment in the race, considering South Carolina, I think 60% of their primary electorate is black. So that's a big deal.
Now, this is a huge deal for Bernie Sanders. As we know, he's been moving his way up every single poll since, God knows when. I've been on the show dozens and dozens of times.
Yeah.
I've just watched Bernie Sanders continue to rise.
Right.
And as I've said before, I think he will be the candidate. Going into tonight's debate in South Carolina, these numbers are very impressive. Bernie Sanders obviously needed some more help with the black vote, I think, and I think he's getting that. I think his numbers are showing that, and I think riding into tonight's debate, those are good numbers to have.
Yes.
Well, and what I saw coming out of Nevada, I mean, we've talked to Chuck Rocha here. The Hispanic numbers were unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, some metrics say 73% of Latinos went to Bernie Sanders. But to my eyes, maybe the most important statistic coming out is when you asked voters, do they want someone who, shares their principles or is electable, which candidate would you pick? And Bernie Sanders, for the first time, won those electability voters, which has been a key and an important point with African-American voters. So as he's proving that electability, he seems to be picking up more and more strength in the black community.
Yeah.
I agree with that, Crystal, that Bernie Sanders, that has been his issue all along, is the electability, and that is the one thing that is really unifying the Democratic Party, and that is in a place where Bernie Sanders has been struggling until now. And I think it's all the momentum game that we saw that he did well in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, that has been his argument, is that I'm looking to broaden my appeal, and he wants to change the electorate. I would argue that we haven't really seen a big change in the electorate in the way that Bernie Sanders is hoping that he can really pull in new voters. But I do think it's interesting that he's broadening his appeal, especially after 2016, when, he's still the progressive part of the wing of the party. But if he can actually pull in more Democratic support, people all want to just beat Donald Trump.
I mean, he's dominating every single demographic group I have in front of me.
Right,
One of the other interesting thing here, Henry, is actually, even though Sanders leads by wide margins, except amongst black voters, the number 2 on Hispanic voters and number 2 amongst white voters is actually Bloomberg. It's not Joe Biden.
I was going to say, yeah.
So, I think that's curious, as in this kind of is a Bernie kind of Bloomberg rate. I'm not saying in terms of the vote totals, I don't think it'll work out that way.
No.
But, saying the national support, superimpose this onto Super Tuesday, that really will show kind of where the separation begins to happen, with Bloomberg still being a formidable force.
100%. I think tonight's debate, you're going to see either one of two things. I think you're going to see, people come out full force against Bernie, trying to make that division happen, or you're going to see everyone do what they did last debate and just attack Bloomberg and make sure he's done and out of the race, and just destroy him. Because honestly, I personally don't see him. I thought his performance last week was completely disgusting and awful, and it was just terrible.
You didn't like his jokes?
No, I don't think anyone liked his jokes. I think you're going to see him get attacked again tonight.
He certainly is.
So Bernie basically just needs to come on full defense and keep the punches from hitting him, and I think he can do that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more in the next block about tonight's debate, which is going to be important. But to underscore what you're saying there, Henry, of how significant this could be, the NBC Marist South Carolina Democratic poll had overall Biden leading Sanders by 4. However, they had interviews that happened before last week's debate, and they had some interviews that happened after last week's debate. And their numbers guy, Steve Kornacki, tweeted out that before the debate, Biden was actually up on Sanders by 10. After the debate, the interviews that they conducted then, it was dead even. And that was really before even you had all the momentum coming out of Nevada. Now, I would say, personally, I think Biden may well hang on in South Carolina. His performance in Nevada was kind of pathetic ultimately when he was leading in the polls up until very recently, but he did hang on for that second place finish, about 20% of the vote. It was enough to allow him to tell a story about how he might be on a comeback. And he has every bit of the sort of establishment behind him, backing him, aiding his campaign in South Carolina, which could end up being important.
It's really striking that Joe Biden is shrinking in the polls in South Carolina. That is exactly what his strategy, his ground game has been this whole time.
The firewall.
And the fact that if he can't pull it off, even if he does, I think it's still hard to see a path to his nomination just based on the momentum.
I mean, he was leading here by like 50 points.
I know.
I mean, literally, like last year at this time, he was leading
there was
South
not
Carolina,
a shot that anyone else was going to have any numbers close to it.
So reporting indicates that James Clyburn is going to endorse Joe Biden, but does it matter at this point? One of the crazy things about this race is you can see, so for example, South Carolina's biggest newspaper just came out and endorsed Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I guess the media is elite and out of touch everywhere.
Exactly.
They're just wanting to be irrelevant.
I mean, why do you aspire to irrelevance? I truly don't understand.
No, and I mean, he just keeps having these viral gaffes of him saying bizarre things. Like, for example, I just watched one on the way over here. He was saying that he was excited to run for U.S. Senate, and I mean, it's like, dude, I mean, this continues to happen every day. Every time you speak, you say something that's just completely wrong. You don't even know what office you're running for anymore.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is sad, but I do think that he's just going to continue to beat himself up, and I think that his numbers will sink. I do think there is a chance that he will hold on to South Carolina just because, like, the firewall it's kind of there. But I do think it's not necessarily a firewall anymore. There is a possibility that someone else can.
It's at a point now where, Kate, if you even only win by 2% or 1%, you kind of lost, right? I mean, that was the thing. And then it's like you have not shown the viability that you need to the black populations in Alabama and Georgia, the rest of the Deep South, which are very much considering people like Michael Bloomberg. We just interviewed somebody out of South Carolina, a pollster. Number 2 choice for Tom Steyer is actually, 40%, 60%?
Yeah. 40% is Biden, 30% is Sanders.
So there you go. I mean, so Tom Steyer is eating a huge chunk away from Biden just because people are like, I don't believe in this guy. I don't think he can get it done.
And I think what's interesting is on Capitol Hill, usually there'd be pressure from congressional leaders to say X, Y, and Z, you need to drop out, you need to put your support and consolidate. We do know that Senate Democrats specifically are nervous about a Bernie Sanders as the nominee because they don't know how he'll react. They don't know what he'll be like. He might be similar, they would argue, to a Donald Trump presidency where he can't get a consensus in Congress, so he just uses executive action. Usually we'd have a lot of congressional leaders trying to consolidate support, saying, if people don't want Bernie Sanders, you can't have 4 candidates sitting back saying, it's everyone drop out but me. Everyone drop out but me.
Yeah.
It's actually, I just saw reporting right before you guys got on the show. The Bloomberg campaign's been shuttling back and forth to D.C. trying to make that exact case to moderates in Congress saying, you guys all need to endorse me. So
good luck.
I don't think it's going to work out.
By the way, who performs worst in head-to-head polling against Donald Trump?
Bloomberg.
The worst is Michael Bloomberg, just for any centrist establishment types who might be watching. All right, guys, stick with us. We'll be right back after this.